Welcome back to this week's episode of Promising Young Surgeon, where we dive deep into the unique stories and journeys of surgeons from all walks of life. Today, we have an inspiring conversation lined up with someone who's made choices that challenge traditional expectations in both life and surgery, which, I love to see it. Dr. Caitlin Smith is a talented surgeon who has chosen to be child-free. And today, we'll discuss her journey, the reception she's faced, and how her decision has impacted her personal and professional lives. Before I introduce her, I'd like to share some data from the literature. So this article, which of course we will link in the show notes per usual, I found of great interest. The title is Prevalence, Age of Decision, and Interpersonal Warmth Judgements of Child-Free Adults, Replication and Extensions, by Jennifer Watling Neal et al., and it's a group out of Michigan State University that published this in April 2023. So, child-free individuals, who are also described as childless by choice or voluntarily childless, have decided that they do not want biological or adopted children. This is an important population to understand because its members have unique reproductive health and end-of-life needs, and they encounter challenges managing work-life balance and with stereotypes. So, prior estimates of child-free adults' prevalence in the United States, as well as their age of decision and their interpersonal warmth judgments, have all varied widely over time and depending on the study design. And so, what I liked about this study is that they did a pre-registered direct replication of a recent population representative study. And that was to kind of clarify some of these characteristics of the contemporary child-free population. All estimates concerning child-free adults replicate and boost confidence in earlier conclusions that child-free people are numerous and decide early in life, and that parents exhibit strong in-group favoritism while child-free adults do not. So, I wanted to share that overview with you, but it's very interesting. I like some of these technical definitions, to kind of introduce some of these terms. There are several groups of non-parents, and that includes not yet parents, who are people who plan to have children in the future, childless individuals who want to have children but could not have them due to infertility or life circumstance, undecided individuals are not sure if they want children in the future, and ambivalent are those who are not planning to have children in the future but are unsure whether they wanted to have children. And so, of course, all of these groups of non-parents have specific characteristics, needs, and life experiences. And we are distinguishing today about child-free individuals versus other non-parents. The methods for this study were that they used data samples from April 12th to April 22nd, 2022, as part of the State of the State survey, which is a recurring public opinion survey of Michigan adults that's conducted by the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research at Michigan State University. Because SOSS data is de-identified and publicly available, the Michigan State University IRB deemed them to not be, a human subject study. And so basically they had some really great robust data, and that included 1,000 Michigan adults who were matched on gender, age, race, and education to sampling frame based on the 2019 American Community Survey. And so in terms of some of the pre-registered replication measures, one was reproductive status. They had a couple questions that classify respondents into 6 mutually exclusive reproductive statuses. So the first question was, do you have or have you ever had any biological, step, or adopted children? Respondents who answered yes to that question were classified as parents. Those who answered no to the first question were then routed to a second question. Do you plan to have any biological or adopted children in the future? Respondents who answered yes were classified as not yet parents, and those who answered I don't know were classified as undecided. Those who answered no to that second question were then routed to a third question. Do you wish you had or could have biological or adopted children? Respondents who answered yes to this third question were then childless. Those who answered I don't know were classified as ambivalent, and those who answered no were classified as child-free. And so, I think it's helpful looking at the results from the study to kind of see how they categorized everybody. And then for age of decision, all respondents were, classified as child-free. And then of that subset, they asked, how old were you when you decided that you did not want to have children? To ease recall, they provided response options in decade intervals, including under 10, 10 to 19 years old, 20 to 29 years old, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, 50 or older, and I don't know. And then finally, and this one's relevant as we look at the results, but the metric of interpersonal warmth. They measured interpersonal warmth towards child-free individuals and parents using 2 feeling thermometer questions. The questions were presented in random order to the participants to avoid order effects. And to measure interpersonal warmth towards child-free individuals, they used the question, on a 0 to 100 scale, where 0 means very cold or unfavorable, and 100 means very warm or favorable, how do you feel towards people who never want to have or adopt children? To measure interpersonal warmth towards parents, they used the question, on a 0 to 100 scale, where 0 means very cold or unfavorable, and 100 means very warm or favorable, how do you feel towards people who have children? So, these findings from the study were very interesting, certainly congruent with prior studies. So there was nothing like really explosive or crazily new, but I want to highlight 5 key takeaways. Number 1 was the prevalence. So approximately 21% of adults in Michigan in this study identify as child-free, and that's a significant portion of the population. Number 2, on decision timing. Most child-free adults make their decision during their teens or 20s, as opposed to what different, certainly think pieces have posited and things like that about how it is made later on in life. Warmth judgments. Parents show in-group favoritism, feeling warmer towards other parents than child-free adults. And then the demographics. Men, white adults, single individuals, and LGBTQIA participants are more likely to identify as child-free. Regret and mind changing. Child-free adults, especially early deciders, rarely change their minds and do not show higher regret later in life compared to parents. To kind of sum up, I think that these are really interesting findings. Again, they directly replicated nearly all prior findings related to prevalence, age of decision, and interpersonal warmth judgments of child-free adults. And it is really interesting in terms of like this interpersonal warmth piece, how parents show in-group favoritism, whereas child-free adults less so do that. And of course, so that means that parents view other parents like very positively and favorably, whereas perhaps they would tend to view child-free adults less favorably. Like literally, that's what you can see the questions asked in the study, and that's kind of what the data reflects. The converse was not the case in terms of child-free people, having just this in-group favoritism where they preferred or felt much more favorably towards other child-free adults compared to towards parents. So I just wanted to share some of this data. I think it's very interesting. It was cool to see how they did this particular study, again, replicating a lot of the findings that have been published, perhaps even on smaller scales or with older data in the past. And so now I'd like to move forward and introduce you to our guest today, Dr. Smith. Dr. Caitlin Smith was born in Davis, California, and after attending University of Washington for her undergraduate degree, earned her MD from Albany Medical College in 2009, followed by residency in general surgery at the University of California, Davis, completed in 2015. She then went on to do fellowship training in pediatric surgery at Seattle's Children's Hospital in 2017. She's currently an associate professor of surgery at the University of Washington and an attending pediatric surgeon in the Division of Pediatric General and Thoracic Surgery at Seattle's Children's Hospital. Dr. Smith is board certified by the American Board of Surgery in adult general and pediatric surgery. As some of her fun facts, she has more than 75 houseplants and is a diehard 49er football and Giants baseball fan. And one of her current main hobbies is photography. Thank you so much for being here today with us, Dr. Smith. It's wonderful to chat with you.
No problem. Thank you so much for the invitation and for that lovely introduction.
I'm very impressed by your houseplant number.
Oh, yeah. My parents were here and my dad started counting them. They were visiting. He started counting and he got up to 75 and was like, I'm done. I'm stopping.
Have you always had a green thumb?
You know what? No, my mom is a huge gardener. She's a master gardener. She's has all this training and volunteers in Davis, California, where I grew up. My sister also has a huge green thumb and gardens all the time, has an amazing garden. I picked it up late, probably not until I always had like a couple house plants, but probably not until I was sort of a fellow did I kind of start collecting.
Honestly, very cool fellow hobby.
Yeah.
I will tell on myself a little bit, which is that, some of you guys, if you ever watch these episodes on YouTube, you've seen my nice like olive tree in the background. This guy is a fake. I could never keep a tree alive, I don't think. It's pretty reasonable because from far away, it is plausibly a tree. I don't know. Did it fool you?
Absolutely. It did. It's really funny because we started doing residency interviews and fellowship interviews via Zoom. And I started, you kind of always need an icebreaker. And so I started asking people about the things that were behind them. And a lot of people like in the Zoom and a lot of people have plants. And then I had to start asking if they were alive or not, because partway through the interview season, I realized a lot of people, they're like, no, I got them from Marshall's. And I was like, wow, it totally looks like a real plant. So yes, your olive tree looks beautiful.
That is so funny. And I just want to say really quick, because that reminds me of like all the hilarious, sometimes a little traumatic, like interview trail questions.
Yeah.
I could totally envision, like, I could envision for me that I would have one of these little fake Marshall's plants and the attending would be like, what type of, I am a master gardener myself. Exactly. Like, what's the family? Yeah. And like, what amount of sunlight does it like?
Yeah, unfortunately, I probably put a few people on the spot before I realized that like not everybody has like real plants. But it's ended up being like a really fun question.
No, that's so fun. It just people, some attendings can kind of turn anything into the read my mind. Like, what artery am I thinking of? They'd be like, what does your plant like to do? Like, what's its favorite food? And I'd be like, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And what would I name your plant? And again, I honestly
don't. Funny. Yeah, I can see how that would be. Maybe I need to change up my icebreaker question.
No, I'm sure if you come at it from a nice way. But yeah, it's so easy to like spook an interviewee. Mm-hmm. And if they're like, oh my gosh, like I got caught. Like, and now fake plant owner is going to go in my profile. What does that say about me and my character?
No, nothing whatsoever. I just think it's cool to see what people like and what they have aesthetic. Some people have like really cool art that they've done or collected on their travels. Like, so it's a fun question. I feel like I learned.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Something about people. No judgment about plants not being real.
No, I love that. So I do want to dive right in. Many of us know that being a female surgeon comes with unique challenges, and I imagine that being child-free presents an additional layer of expectations.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that is sort of the perception is that, we're sort of free of responsibility, and the other piece of it is that like as a child-free person, and I think this goes for men too sometimes, not just, it's a little bit more to the front of the mind for maybe women who are child-free, but that you don't have anything, like you could just work until whenever, like you could pick up whatever shift or cover whatever case or do whatever. And I think that or help whoever out, because you don't really have like a similar level of responsibility to people and obligations outside of the hospital. And so I think that's sort of the thing that I've noticed the most as I've gone through my professional career is just sort of like this. There's lots of throwaway comments about how, oh, well, you can do it. Like why can't you do it? Thing.
Oh my gosh. Well,
And that's kind of been the most interesting part, I think.
I definitely want to go deeper into that because
Sure.
that kind of gets me going just hearing you talk about it. But
Mm-hmm.
to kind of introduce, yourself and your background to all of us today, I wanted to share that, of course, I read your incredible piece in the Huffington Post a few weeks ago.
Thank you. I appreciate you reading it. Thanks.
Oh my gosh, you're such a great writer. Like, truly, I loved it. A girlfriend had sent it to me and said, oh, you got to read this. Like, this is a must read. And what you wrote about was a time in your life where the decision to be child free, kind of these life choices, lifestyle, was brought up professionally at work in a meeting.
Yeah.
And of course, that was really striking. And so just so that we're all on the same page, can you please share kind of that story that introduced really yourself to the world, I think, as a writer and as a child-free surgeon?
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. I'm happy to share. I think that, I was very struck in the moment when it happened as well. I think that, I was in a meeting and we were it was winding down and people were getting ready to go. But, everyone was sort of talking about their weekend plans. It was, later in the week. So people were asking what people were doing. And I said I was going to Vegas. And, there were some important people in the room from a hospital administration standpoint. And one of the other people in the room just sort of threw out, oh, it's because she doesn't have kids. And everybody laughed, and I felt, I wasn't offended in the moment. I was more shocked that it had sort of been used as a joke and also just the weight of I don't have any responsibility I can do was all sort of baked into that. And I really thought about it for days after that. I had never had anything like that quite that hit me like that in a professional setting about that I don't have kids. And I don't think the person who said it meant anything, but I just think there's kind of little thought that went into it. And it really kind of made me want to talk more about it and what that feels like on the other side. Also, I mean, there are plenty of people who do try really hard to have kids who end up not having children, and to not know anything about me and just feel like somebody could drop that into a conversation. I think regardless of what my choice was, just felt very strange and didn't feel like something that I wanted to kind of just let roll by without saying something about.
I think that that's incredible. And I really appreciate the point that you're making about, agreed, a woman's status as a mother of a child or not can be for so many reasons that to assume that maybe it's by choice, that's very much the wrong assumption in a lot of cases. I definitely think that for those individuals, having it brought up in a cavalier manner at work would just be devastating, like what you're alluding to. And so it means a lot that you are kind of explaining to people why the harmlessly intended comment at work just still doesn't really fly. Because I believe you that person probably did not mean it.
I don't think they had any malintent. Yeah, but I just also don't think they thought about it, which is sort of unfortunate. And honestly, the other side, the converse, is I'm not really a fan of either, where, I am child-free by choice, but that I can just go to Vegas whenever, that it didn't come with any sort of I don't have any responsibility. I don't have any other obligation. I can just kind of be fancy free and zip off to wherever, whenever I want. It's sort of the converse side of that I also don't think is reality. And I think it sort of just reinforces this kind of these stereotypes that women, I think, without children are put into.
Totally agree. And this is such a great example of it, because if being a very successful, competent female surgeon like yourself is not enough to explain. I mean, you have an enormous amount, even as we go through your introduction and your CV and your career, you have an enormous amount of responsibility And for that to even be like not an enormous amount of responsibility, I just hate that it feels like they make that smaller for you. Like with that comment and with discrediting your incredible work. I mean, for all women who are child free, I don't think that they're just like fancy free. What a great word for it, you know? But especially like, I don't know a single female surgeon who's fancy free. I'll say that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I think, you know, I think it's just sort of like the way the world views women. And even if you do these other things, you should be a mother. And it's sort of like the larger worldview. And if you're not doing that, you're damaged, you're selfish, you're, you know, because like, sure, you could do all these things, but like you want to be a mom too, like a wife and a mom and all of this stuff, right? Like, isn't that like your main goal? That kind of dialogue is just still there, you know? I think that, yes, there are plenty of women who are super successful with kids and without, but it's all kind of like surrounding the value of a woman, right? Like when you get down to it, how the world values women, you see it play out in the news, you know, and like all of the restrictive laws that are coming into play. And, you know, it's all about, you know, women and their purpose is to have children. And I just think it probably was a throwaway comment for that person. They probably didn't think about it. But that's a lot of the reason why I felt a lot of weight in the moment.
Absolutely. When we think of how society views women, and particularly women who potentially decide not to have children, are there any particular great pieces of writing, art, film, anything that you think are like great educational pieces, ways for people to feel seen or educate themselves?
Yeah, Ruby Warrington wrote a book called Women Without Kids. I quote it in my piece, and I think that anybody, man, woman, whoever, should. It's a great book to read, and sort of just as a thought process to think about, like all of these layers that are sort of baked into how the world sees women without kids. And I think somewhere in there, she talks about how it's like this great feminist act for you to like, you could choose still to not have a child, right? You can still do that. And I think that the way she explains all of the history and things about it and how women have been viewed, it's just really beautiful. And I really appreciated her book.
That's wonderful. I have to check it out. I did see, you know, your quote in your article. Mm-hmm. And so for sure. One thing that I think is interesting, and as we look at how like people view these decisions, view each other, you know, in the study, the 2023 study, and some of the data that I presented, you know, earlier this episode, when people looked at warmth judgments, parents showed in-group favoritism, feeling warmer towards other parents than child-free adults, while child-free adults did not show that same in-group favoritism.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. I mean, I think part of the point of the piece is that this child-free versus mother, all it does is divide us as, I think, women. And instead of unifying us, I think that, you know, I think that we could be, you know, one is not better than the other. It's just your individual choice. And there certainly is so much to be said for physicians and surgeons who are mothers and everything that they go through every day. I mean, a ton has been written about that, and all true and valid. And none of my piece is meant to take away from that. It's more just, I was interested in trying to find a way to see the other side and kind of unify the collective, you know, effort, right? I mean, and I think that data probably, I mean, it's fascinating, and I think it sort of highlights the underpinnings of what happens in professional places between people with children and not, especially women.
Absolutely. And even outside of professional situations, I
Yes,
think.
totally, for sure.
I agree with your message about unification. And I do definitely feel like, in your writing in HuffPost and everything, like that message comes through. But I just appreciate that the unification doesn't come, at your own cost. It's just about like not being diminished, because nobody should be diminished in this situation.
Exactly. And I think that I have so many of my friends have kids. I love hearing about it. It's not about them and how they're growing up. And I spend time with my friends and their kids, and it's not, one is not meant to deter from the other, like it's not, or take away. Like I think we can all highlight and support each other.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind sharing, when did you personally start considering the decision to have children or not? Like at what point in your life, at what point in your career was that as well?
Yeah, really good question. I kind of always thought I would. It was like kind of like, oh yeah, sure, probably. And I think that as you go through surgical training, especially when you get to the end of it, there's sort of like a bit of a scarcity mentality, like I think I finished my fellowship when I was 37. And, not a spring chicken. And I think I finished and I sort of had a bit of a panic. There were all these things in life that I wanted to do or thought about, or did I want to do them, or, and was I going to have time? And children was sort of in that list. And I think there was a lot of fear that I was going to miss out on something, or, that I was running, all of this running out of time dialogue around it that exists. And, I have a wonderful partner, Mike, and he and I talked about it. And, he wasn't totally on board. He said that we would if I wanted to, basically. And when I really sat down and I was like, do I want to do this? And I looked at everything, I did take a breath and spend some time thinking. COVID kind of forced that a little bit, and also changed my perspective on some things, I think. But it was sort of like around all of that. And I think most of, I definitely thought I did for a period of time. But when I look back at that period of time, I really think it was born out of fear, and not out of a true desire to go forward and have a child. And I think that, I'm happy that I paused at that moment. And I think, I have no regrets. And I think that, it's really easy to get caught up in that, especially around training and spending so much time dedicated to something bigger than yourself. And then finally getting a moment to think about, well, what do you want? And so I was very lucky to have those moments and be able to think about it and decide that for myself.
Thank you for sharing. And I really applaud you for examining your values, what you wanted from life. Like that's not easy for any of us. I guess I say this about myself, right? I can't speak for all of us, but it is not pretty. It's not easy to sit and look at yourself and really examine what we want out of life. So,
and what was really interesting, I think, in response to the piece, was the number of people who wrote me, not only who said, I'm child free, thank you so much for putting this in writing, but also those people who said, I have kids. I wish I had taken the time to think about this. I love my kids very much, but I wish I had taken the time to think about this more. And in either my family or my culture, it's not something that's accepted to not go down that road. And that was sort of one of the more surprising parts of the response to the piece, that I think that I was happy to feel that more than one perspective felt that they were happy to have connected with it, and felt in some way seen. I think that was really an amazing part of the whole process that I wasn't expecting.
100%. My girlfriend who had sent me your article, she felt very seen by it and, was definitely cheerleading the perspective that you shared. And I will say, and I'd love to hear your experience, but when you tell me that you had people reach out and say, okay, I wish that I had given it more thought, that I had, not because I don't love my kids by any means, but just, I wish I had given it more thought, and they advise others to stop and take more thought. I will say that I have heard that perspective from multiple female physicians over the course of my career. So I've heard that before. Had you been ever given that advice before?
You know what? No, there's sort of like, I went to medical school. I started in 2009 in medical school. So that was a while ago now. So a lot of the dialogue when I would tell people I wanted to go into surgery was, well, you better really think about that. You're not going to be a good wife and mother. Like, that's most of what I heard. There was no discussion about great. It was like a lot about, and from women and men, both, the response was, well, think about your family and what you're going to do to them if you're a surgeon. And that was kind of like the major feedback that I got. When I talked to a lot of trainees coming up, and there's still some of that dialogue there about, well, you're not going to be a good wife and mother, as if those are very much the end goal for everybody. And so, and I think there's also, not to go on a tangent or anything, there's a little bit of a historic idea that, everyone's heard you can have it all, right? Like you can have it all, right? And I think that while I understand where that sentiment comes from, I think it's a bit of I don't want to say it's a lie, but it's a bit of a misnomer, right? Like, you can have it all as a woman, you just can't have it all on the same day, maybe. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're not going to be able to do everything all in one day. And I think the pressure that it puts on collectively women as a whole, this you can have it all idea is too much to perhaps for anybody to aspire to. And it just makes people feel like they're failing when they're not,
it puts like realistic expectations on people.
Yeah, exactly. So I love the intent behind you can have it all. Like that's fantastic. But I think that it is a little bit misleading. And I wish somebody had kind of like had those types of conversations with me when I was going through training. Like, I don't know, what do you want? What do you want your life to look like? Like, rather than having it be so focused on what I was gonna, maybe like all I was gonna miss out on was being a good mother and a good wife. I think that was not something I was expecting.
No, absolutely. And I will say, so when I started my surgical residency, it was 2017. And like I said, this was not like
right when I graduated fellowship.
Right.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like the dominant conversation, but just truly like multiple female physicians had said just that type of like, hey, just be thoughtful. And, I didn't take time to examine my decisions at the time, but perhaps I would if I could go back, just kind of things like that. So I love to see that the needle even, like gradually moves, of course, with like, the types of work that you're writing and sharing now, like just continues to move like in a very public and supportive way. One thing I wanted to mention is that, can I say that I hate the thought of like male surgeons telling young trainees what kind of mother and wife will you be. I mean, that makes me a little bit crazy. I gotta be honest with you.
I think that's totally fair. I just recently had somebody shadow with me because a bunch of people from UW are like undergrads and people shadow, and I was sort of like recounting some of this stuff, and I was like, is this still the way it is? And they were like, oh yeah, I heard that like just the other day someone told me, because I'm thinking about going to surgery. And I was like, gosh. So the needle is moving, but some of it is still there. And so I think that we just continue to have these conversations and talk about it and provide the alternative perspective.
The needle is not moving fast enough. If there are any men out there saying that, like, I don't know you like that. Like, 'cause I can just totally picture, right? Like, you're a trainee. You don't know this like man very well. He might be your professional superior in the hospital hierarchy. Legitimately, there's something extremely sinister about that I just wanted to call out for people who are experiencing it, or if you hear that type of thing now, it's very sinister. Maybe you don't see it in your 20s, but you will in your 30s.
Yeah.
And so forth. The other thing I wanted to mention about that is, pot kettle black a little bit, because on a related note, when you mentioned earlier on, as we started this conversation about maybe colleagues in the hospital being like, well, the implication is you don't have a kid. So like, I assume you can just like take this extra work, like roll this case from call. Like I just, again, I have a family, but best wishes to you. What is so ironic to me is that I know a lot of surgeons who love to take cases back to the OR on call, even if they don't need to go right now, to get away from their families. I cannot tell you how many Mother's Days I spent in the OR because an attending was trying to get away from their family.
Oh, that's really funny. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely the converse to every side of every story. There's the flip side. So I can imagine that would be true for sure.
So yeah, exactly. It's just funny because there's really like, there's two perspectives on it, because there are people with families who are just actively trying to get away from their families and they use work to do so.
Right. Yeah.
So it's just an interesting thought.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you feel that your decision has allowed you to take any opportunities or pursue passions that would have been harder to engage with if you had had children?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that I travel sometimes for longer stretches. Sometimes I operate overseas. So I think that I would not, like, those things would have been really challenging, I think. And I actually travel with another woman who does have children when we go on these trips, and I see the challenges. It's hard. It's like a big time difference. Her kids are young, and I think that is easier for me to do, and that's professionally given me the ability to go and operate and give talks and things that maybe I have a little bit more availability to do. I think that I think that's one thing that professionally has been easier for me.
Well, that's incredible that you do these overseas trips to operate. Can you tell me more about those, and for how long do you go overseas?
Yeah, they're usually for a week or so at a time. I go to Armenia every year with Fresno Armenian mission, and I first went in 2019, and then we go every year. We work at the public hospital there, Arab Care, and we've made there's just wonderful, really nice local surgeons there that are wonderful, that host us, and we operate with every week. So we kind of go back every year to sort of build on what we did before, see our patients from last year, and it's been a really wonderful experience.
That's awesome. That's very cool that you do that, and that's a part of, your professional identity as well.
It's not something that I really necessarily expected that I would have the opportunity to do, but I've been really lucky to be able to have that as an opportunity.
Wonderful. How have your relationships with friends who do have children evolved over time? And then how do you approach any conversations where you feel like you need to defend your life choice or not be minimized for it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that my friendships over time with women who have children have evolved in the way in that I feel more sure, I feel more resolved in, and I feel more confident in how I've chosen to live my life. And so I think that, in our conversations, there's less apology, from my own perspective. I think that that's probably the main thing is that, we have each chosen our path, but I don't need to apologize don't feel the need to apologize as much maybe as I did previously, where, uh, does that make sense? I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly.
No, totally. But maybe that just comes with like being, I think of the quote I love, the more we love our own decisions, the less we need others to love them.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely feel less of a desire or need to defend the choices, as you said, like, how do I approach those situations? I think people have their own opinion, and that's fine. That's their opinion, but I do feel very assured. And I think that makes it a little bit easier. It was interesting because I did get a number of comments on, like, say, Substack or Instagram from this piece. And, there was by far and away the large majority were positive. Of course, there were some in there that were like, oh, he was just joking, like, don't take it so seriously. And I think there historically would have been a time where I would have felt the need to respond to each other, like, but like, that's not the point of the piece. Like, of course that's not the purpose of why I wrote it. They're not necessarily wrong, but I feel much less of a need to respond to those types of comments about, what I wrote or anything about it. So I think that's probably the best way to answer that part of the question.
That makes sense. I mean, there's always going to be just someone who totally like misses the plot, who, is in the comment section.
Yeah,
probably
exactly.
Unavoidable, I think. But I love that because I can hear you keeping the main thing. And like, that's a very healthy way. Plus, I think, lends itself to a lot of success and longevity, even on Substack. Because again, like the randoms in the comment section will
always exist. Yes, they do.
They'll always chirp you a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
And, this kind of builds on that question because basically, we're talking about like socially with your friends. And then, yes, there's the whole internet aspect when you are a writer, putting yourself out there publicly. Mm-hmm. I would be interested to hear if this affects in any way your relationship with patients. And I'll say just personally, I do not currently have any children. I am married. I wear a wedding band when I work in the hospital.
Yeah.
And patients ask me.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, don't even get me started about the patients who ask me if I'm pregnant. Please. Yeah. And if you're my patient, if you're hearing this, don't ask me that. Like, like I get that. And then I get, because people will be back for like a 6-month follow-up and they will legitimately be like, wow, amazing. Congratulations. And I'm like, nope, just father time. Thank you. Just, like it's so uncalled for. But then I have other patients be like, do you have kids? And I tell them, no. And I try to look in their ear or whatever. And they'll be like, oh, do you want kids? Like, when are you planning to have kids?
Yeah,
so have you experienced any of that?
Yeah, not as much anymore. I think, thanks also to time turning. When I started as an attending, a fair bit more, and also as a fellow, I'm a pediatric surgeon, so I'm around kids and their parents all the time. I think that it's gotten less and less over the years. But when I started, there was a fair amount of that, and it's just something that I think people feel entitled to ask, and hopefully that becomes less over time.
Yeah. I mean, of course, male doctors are probably not going to get that question. I don't think that people would be like, hey, did you impregnate your wife? Like, is she with child? Like, what's up? And what are your family plans?
Yeah. I think the most common question I get asked is still sometimes now, which I'm going to take as a compliment because maybe I don't have enough gray hair yet, but people will ask me if I've ever done it before. Have you ever done this before? How many times have you done this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I get that question probably more than from my patients and families now rather than, but I have done it before for a number of years.
That's very nice. No, I will say, I got to say, you are a spring chicken. You're just not, just not fancy free.
Yeah, that's fair. Put it on a t-shirt.
No, I love that. Like as a bumper sticker or maybe like
Yeah.
the tagline of your
Yeah.
Substack, like
Tagline
spring
in the
chicken,
making for sure.
spring chicken, but not fancy free. That's like
Yeah.
honestly most female surgeons, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
that's fair.
well, I definitely think that, being a role model, having the platform and the perspective that you do is super important. Going back to like, the next generation of doctors, younger women who are absorbing, the information that the world gives them, which might be inappropriately some like 60-year-old male surgeon telling them that they should reconsider their career choices because it might make them slightly less of a good wife or mother.
Yeah.
But, what do you feel like is your responsibility to kind of represent child-free women in medicine and to advocate to the next generation, especially when you have learners with you, to mentor them and kind of share your ideals?
Yeah, I think my responsibility is twofold. One, I think that I want to provide I want anybody, women particularly, but there are lots of other people out there who are told they can't be surgeons. I want anybody to know that if they follow the steps, they work, and if it's what they really want to do, that they can be a surgeon. I think that obviously there's a lot of work that goes into that. And I think there's a lot in our culture as surgery of telling people that they can't do something before they've even tried. And I think that's a bit unfortunate. And I think it's more prevalent for women. So I think that that's, I guess, what I feel responsible, or what I try to let people know. Like, is it hard? Yes. Is it a lot of work? Yes. Can you do it? Sure. Like, yeah, you can do it. And if it's what you really want to do and you feel passionately about it, then you absolutely should do it. And I see so many young individuals come to, shout at me or whatever, who have been told they just can't do it. And I'm not really sure, before the word go, before they've even tried. And they're passionate, excited, and just to see the enthusiasm kind of get squashed is really sad to me. I think the other thing, more from a women's perspective, I think that to show an example of somebody who can be competent and work hard and be themselves, like I am myself. I had my fellow in clinic with me the other day. It was pretty funny. And we were talking to patients and families, and he's like, you're the same person in front of patients, and you don't have like a doctor personality. He's like, you don't have a voice. And he was laughing about it. He's like, you're exactly the same person. And so I think being able to be myself, and show that I can do that and be professional and be successful, and you don't have to apologize for who that is, especially as a woman, I think is something that I think is the other thing I try to do. I don't know if I'm always successful at either of those things, but I think they're my lofty goals.
I love that. And when you talk about, not giving up before you've even tried, like you can do it. Don't think that you just can't do it before you've tried. The corollary to that, I think, for medical training, because I do a lot of talks for, medical students, residents level type of individuals. When it is your first or second time doing something, you don't have to be amazing at it. And again, like in medicine, sometimes we lose that a little bit. Like, again, your attending did not come out of the womb knowing how to do this expertly. Yeah. And there is sometimes this expectation, or at least the learner feels like an expectation is placed on them, which I don't think is totally imagined. Like, why aren't you doing this right? Or why aren't you doing it fast? And it's like, this is my first rodeo. So you don't have to be perfect at your first rodeo.
Well, people who want to be surgeons they checked all the boxes, right? I say this often to my trainees. You checked all the boxes to get here. You did all the right things. You're used to being good at everything. You didn't become a surgeon by accident, right? Like you didn't that was not like a mistake. Like you worked hard, you did all of the right things. You're used to being good, and to show up, it's both, I think, challenging for the learner and for the, I think the expectations put on them, and also the expectations they put on themselves, because they're so used to showing up and being proficient at things, and doing, getting a straight A, scoring well on tests, like doing all that stuff. You show up in an OR and like you have to get feedback. It's a process, it's a whole 5 to 7 year process. So you're not going to show up on day one and be able to close skin perfectly. You're going to build on your skills, and it's just a much different process, I think, than what you go through to get there. And it is exactly as you say. Like, I think the expectation is not always aligned with the reality of the process, but making it more acceptable to go through it in the way you're describing, learning, not being perfect, I think is really important to encourage.
And then, you bring up, it's a 5 to 7 year training process. Like, we're both, surgeons. And what's crazy is that, and maybe, some medical students might think, okay, yeah, and I survive intern year. It's like, this learning process never stops, because by the end of being a PGY3, hopefully you're a phenomenal 3. Guess what? July 1 comes around, your responsibilities are completely different. Yeah. The conversations you're having, the triaging you're doing, the kind of clinical decision making is so different, and the cases will be different. Yeah. So best wishes, because you don't just survive intern year and then coast for 4 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's I like to think that you're kind of like an intern and, right? I mean, like you're an and at every, like you're an intern and an R2, and you're like layers. It's like a pyramid, where you're building on skills every year. Cause I mean, like, I hate to tell you, like, I still do H&Ps, you know what I mean? Like, I still do consents, like, I still do all that stuff. It doesn't like go away. And especially, as you said, I mean, the learning curve doesn't stop when you're done either. And you just are, it's just different levels of, getting better at your craft.
I love that. And I'm with you too. I don't have residents. And so all my consults and all my getting supplies together for a procedure.
Do you put in all your orders?
Yeah.
It's helpful. I think it's just a helpful, different way of thinking about the surgical training, rather than, like you said, you don't check a box and finish intern year and you move on. Like, that stuff is carried with you.
Well, I really love that. I want to kind of finish by asking, regarding misconceptions that society has about, child-free women. Are there any final thoughts that you wanted to share to kind of dispel those, particularly in your capacity, I think, as a, again, busy pediatric surgeon?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the main thing is just that we're not like sad and damaged. And it's okay to talk about your kids and talk about all this stuff. Like, it's not, I mean, I think one person's or one woman's choice doesn't detract or take away from the other. They're not mutually exclusive. They should be complementary. And I think we should, I think that's the main thing that I sort of hope for through all of this, is that, like I talked about earlier, just really, instead of having this division amongst women, where there's a little bit of, back and forth there about this responsibility-free life, it's different, it's just different. It's not any less weighty or responsible, but it is different. And the difference is they really should hopefully, we can complement each other,
That's beautiful. That's a great sentiment of unification. I do have one last question for you. This is more on the life outside the hospital side.
Okay.
So since
I thought you were going to ask me about a plant, like if this plant was real.
Oh my gosh, no, I wanted to hear about your favorite plants and stuff. Okay. I assume that guy's real. I don't think that you're walking into these calls with fake plants.
This plant is real. He's very happy there on the bookshelf. But
what is it?
It is it is a tetrasperma. And yeah, he's grown over time, and he's making his way down the bookshelf.
He's beautiful. Do you name any of your plants?
No, you know what? I don't think I have names for any of our plants or many of them at this point. I probably should though. We are attached enough to them to have names for them.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Smith, this has been a truly insightful conversation. I really appreciate all of your openness and the wisdom that you have shared with us today. For our listeners, this episode is just an important reminder that there's no one path to fulfillment and success in life, and nor in medicine. So where can our listeners find and connect with you online?
Oh, great question. Well, first, I just like to say it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you so much again for the invitation. You can find me on Instagram at Miss Education of a Knife, and on Substack also at Miss Education of a Knife.
Wonderful. We will link both of those at the bottom in our show notes so you can connect with her.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Follow me on Instagram at francismay.md and at Rethinking Residency. Visit my website, rethinkingresidency.com, to learn more about resident physician stories and ways that residents can most effectively navigate the game of residency. I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode of Promising Young Surgeon. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please subscribe and leave us a review. Feel free to share with your colleagues. And if you'd like to submit any questions for future episodes, email me at pys@heyinfluent.com.